welcome to the Philly Factor. Three LaSalle University professors are responsible for a program designed to help teachers, administrators, and education students impact the lives and social development of their students. The Writers Matter approach was pioneered here in Philadelphia by my three guests. It was launched in middle schools in the fall of 2005, designed to discover ways to improve the fit between actual English curricula, district state standards, and more recently, the Common Core curriculum standards for writing instruction. The three principals responsible for the Writers Matter approach and their new book, Empowering Young Writers, first of all, a professor of mine when I was a student here at LaSalle, Bob Vogel. Bob is professor of education at LaSalle University and founding director of the Writers Matters program. Deborah Yost, professor of education at LaSalle University, primary researcher for Writers Matters, and Kimberly Lewinski, assistant professor of education at LaSalle and assistant director for the Writers Matter program. And I would like to welcome all three of you to our program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. The Writers Matter approach, Bob, is based on, I guess, an adaptation of the Freedom Writers program, correct?
That's correct.
Tell me a little bit about why you felt it was, I guess, so important to use the basis of that to, I guess, expand upon what it is that you're seeing and what you're doing in the classroom.
Well, the Freedom Writers program, which was developed by Aaron Gruwell back in about I guess it was about 2000, was an amazing success. But it was developed for high school students. And when I read about it more and I learned more about it, I realized that this would be a perfect program for younger adolescents, especially middle school students. So I tried to take the concept of the program and bring it down developmentally for middle school age students between the 6th and 8th grade.
Okay.
And I felt that it had a real unique feature to it that it would fit really well into the school. The original program was a program that was done by a teacher with her own classroom. It was basically just one single classroom, and what I was trying to do was bring it to a lot of kids, and especially in Philadelphia. So I thought it'd be a great program for younger kids to get a chance for them to talk about their lives, to write about their lives, to have their voices be heard.
Deborah, as the primary researcher then for this project, I mean, I think everybody can reflect at a time when they were in a classroom and a teacher would recommend, suggest, or assign a project by which a student would have to sit there and write something about themselves. And while that, most oftentimes students would probably roll their eyes to the back of their head because it was an assignment. And oftentimes kids don't want to put pen to paper and write anything, let alone write about themselves. So when you began to roll out with Bob and your other co-author here, when you decided that you were going to tackle this, I mean, what were some of the research areas that you were looking at to try to move the program forward?
Excellent question. One of the research areas was, of course, to determine whether the students were able to write more proficiently. So we're really looking at whether this program increased student writing skill development. The second area was more amorphous in the sense that with Aaron Gruwell's Freedom Writers Diary program in California with high school students, what she found, and there was no research backing for that, but what she found is the students became more successful as a result of her writing approach, personally successful, that the various groups, diverse groups that were represented in her classroom, various different cultural and racial groups that were absolutely at odds with one another, became closer and bonded together. So we're also interested in not only looking at whether this was an effective writing approach, but also what it does or did for students personally, socially, and in terms of the classroom environment, whether it really helped students in general to achieve more because they wanted to, because they were closer, you know, in terms of relationships. When we know that research shows that relationships does help to improve student achievement. So we did a lot of surveys, end-of-year surveys, where the students actually put down on paper what they thought about the program and its impact on them. We did a qualitative analysis each year on that, I think 8 years in a row. And we got to the point where our data was totally saturated, meaning that we had the same results year after year, where the students were saying, I feel better about myself. I have goals now that I never did before. We saw the impact on the different groups in the classroom, how the different groups began to come together. And we largely attributed that to the sharing of the journals. The students write about themselves, and then they share their writing with the whole class and the teacher. So what we found was just other students hearing these stories gave them a little bit of empathy and understanding that they all shared more common things than different things. And so they started to understand each other, which brought them closer together. The other impact was the teacher understanding, that the teacher began to understand where these kids were coming from and more able to teach them more effectively because of knowing the students. And so all of these kind of things were burgeoning as we began the program and finding out more and more about it, which kind of led us to where we are today.
Kimberly, when you set out then to work on this project, I mean, how important was it for you to get pretty much a cross-representation of all types of students? Because some people might think, I mean, the mindset might be, well, if you go to a more affluent school district, maybe even in suburban Philadelphia, you might find students of a different caliber of talent than if you go to an inner city school. So how important was it? And Deborah mentioned about having this cross-reference of all demographics. But tell me a little bit about how important it was to get that snapshot of really everybody in order to include in the book.
Well, I think the beauty of this program is that it really meets the needs of every student out there. It's not limited to above average, below average, on-level students. It's really based on the foundation that kids want to write if we let them. And they want to write about things that matter to them and things that are important to them. And that's really where Writers Matters comes from. Bob did a lot of research ahead of time, looking at journals, seeing what were kids writing about, and that's really where the themes from the book came to be. And so regardless of where you're living, children have similar challenges. They want to talk about their lives. They want to talk about things happening within their families, things happening within their peers. And so although the specific situations that they may write about may be a little bit different, really the underlying theory behind it is the same regardless of all children.
So Bob, then in the Writers Matter approach, and I think Kimberly hit something on the head here, is that it was discovered that the students like to write, but they like to write about what is of interest to them. So does the book then recommend to educators and administrators that when you sit down and you design your curriculum for your class, that you incorporate things in that curriculum that students are going to be eager to write about and not necessarily what you think it is they should be writing about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you're asking a question that's really based on everything that we know about the way kids learn. When you approach children, students in the classroom, you need to start from their prior experiences. So if you can start with something that they want to write about. For example, most kids, especially in the middle school, feel very alone. They feel everything that happens to them is just about them. If they get a pimple on their face, they're the only person who has a pimple. If their father died, nobody else ever had an experience like that. And so they always feel very alone. So it became pretty important as we developed this program to make sure that we help the teachers, we help the schools, we help the principals understand that you need to start where the students are. That was the important piece. And if you can get them motivated that way, you have them. And it gets back to some of the research that Deb was talking about, is that what's really key here is developing a cohesive classroom, an environment where kids feel very comfortable learning. And that's when they start to share. That's when they start to trust. That's when they start talking to other people that they never spoke to before. And that's the role of a teacher. That's what's important.
I'm assuming that because of the work that you do here at LaSalle through the education department and many of the outreach programs that LaSalle has with schools, and we're talking about student teachers that are going out across the region here, student teaching, are they being armed with this book to incorporate in part of their lesson planning when they go out to these schools? And how eager are administrators at these schools, how agreeable are they to embrace what it is that you have put in the book, Kim?
Well, as you know, the book has just been released, so we're really in the beginning stages of that. I teach a writing course through our graduate program, which we will certainly use this book. It has already been distributed to various administrators. I've been contacted by some that are very interested in this program. How can it be used in my school? What can I do? So I certainly think that there's a lot of buzz being generated. I definitely see us also using it with our undergrad students as well. There's a lot of great really practical and theory-based knowledge throughout the book, which I think is important, especially for our pre-service teachers,
Sure.
you know, to hear the theory behind and then see the practice in place.
And Deb, I guess if student teachers are going out and they're working with elementary school or middle school students, and they're able to get these students to not only write, but write better, more efficiently, more about their own personal experiences, I would have to think that if they're working at the elementary level or the middle school level, that is ultimately going to spill over into the high school and, dare I say, even the college levels, where, I don't know, students today still seem reluctant when you tell them you got to write a 3-page paper on something. You hear the groans in the classroom because they have to write a paper. But I guess if you start out at the earlier levels of school, that eventually will have that ripple effect up.
That's a great point. I think what's important is, as Bob said before, is the initial motivation. Getting kids, because kids do write all the time. They text, they Twitter, they do all these things, but they are not motivated to do school-based tasks. So what Bob said before is we got to get them. We got to capture their attention. We got to get them motivated. And you're right. Hopefully that motivation will span. But it also, this book talks about how important it is for teachers to think about how we can connect content to personal experience of students, not only from a learning perspective, because we know that when we connect personally to the content, it's retained for long term. So if you think about this and you say, okay, I'm teaching, a book, The Lord of the Rings, and we have to, not The Lord of the Rings, that would be probably an interesting book to write. Or that may be a book, actually. Lord of the Flies is what I'm thinking. How did you know? But to take the essence of that book, like a theme from that book and the characters that are struggling in that book, and get adolescents or upper elementary students to kind of align with that character's emotions and think about how their emotions could be similar, and write about it. I think the more we have an authentic curriculum, even if we're dealing with Common Core standards, but bringing it down to a level where the students can personally relate, we're really going to make progress, I think, in terms of learning and writing.
And if I could just add, you talked about, kids don't want to write and just the thought of an assignment. It didn't start out that way. If you walk into a kindergarten classroom and you put pen and paper down, they are eager to sit down and write and tell their stories, whether it be through pictures or through actual words. And so I really see that somehow along the way, we've done that to them. We've taken the joy out of writing. We've taken the pleasure. Kids do want to write about themselves if we allow them to, not, make it a very scripted, this is how you do it, this is what you do. And that's what this program really does, is it opens up that, like Deb said, really connects the curriculum with their lives, and suddenly they care about it a lot more, which then leads to much higher level writing, better writing.
Let me just add one more point to that. There's a ripple effect that occurs here. I mean, we're trying to re-motivate these kids to want to learn and to write. But it's not just about them writing about their personal lives, it's giving them the skills that they feel good about writing. So when it comes time for them to write about social studies or science or something else, that they feel that confidence, that they have the ability to write. Most kids just don't feel good about their writing. So we're using we're using that personal approach to get kids motivated to want to write, because we tell them to write a poem, they can write poetry.
Sure.
Because when they think poetry, they think music, and then music turns into poetry, and so they got it. It's just that when they have to write in an academic sense, they don't think they can do it, or they might not even have the skills. And this works as a motivating force, I guess, to get these kids to want to write and to get them to feel good about what they write about. And what's more important than writing about yourselves?
Sure. How does the social media and the tools of social media today help or hinder educators in their mission? Because, as I think Deb mentioned, kids can write. They're on their phone all day texting, and it may not be grammatically correct, but they can send messages. And if you're on Twitter, you only have so many characters that you could use. So they're using tools to write. It may not be grammatically correct, but how does the social media play into all of this today? Anybody?
Yeah, I say the kids are communicating more now than ever, certainly through writing.
Sure.
Rather than the conversation in the schoolyard before you walk into the classroom, it's done via a text message. So I don't really see social media and technology as a hindrance. However, we certainly know that, all the slang or the,
Emoticons,
yes,
right,
all those kinds of things. All of a sudden we start to see them in academic writing. And when we see that, we know that there's, a disconnect. So it's certainly important that we teach them the different kinds of writing and the different modes of writing. Certainly it's fairly new, and as technology changes on a regular basis, there will be something new to address with each type. But.
And then, Bob, my question is then, how do you, in your work, sort of guide student teachers and even your colleagues to take those type of social media consequences? And should the teacher take that into consideration, that if they're writing and they're not necessarily using spell check, even though their computer has spell check, that they should be lenient? Or how does the teacher then able to assess the work when it may not be up to standards of 20 or 30 years ago, when you didn't have all these other influences in your writing?
Yeah, the question's a difficult one to answer, because the technology is here, it's here to stay, and,
Sure.
and we're going to have more and more of it. What I found, and I might be skirting the question a little bit, but what I found is that when kids get a chance to write, they like writing with a pen and pencil, and they like to put their thoughts down, and they'll go to the computer to do the revision, but they still like to write. And when they're given the opportunity, it's kind of like a personal space time, and it's human nature. They still want that. They'll leave the class, like my college students, my university students. I mean, as soon as they leave the class, every telephone comes out, and they're texting and
Sure.
they're doing whatever. But give them a chance to write. University students, middle school students, high school students, especially about things that are important to them, they're okay. And so, in my opinion, yeah, it's an impact on the way kids learn. But if you give them the opportunity, they will write, and I see it all the time. I don't have problems getting my students to write at any level.
And what we also find is when they write a piece that they consider good, they think it's a well-written piece, they want it to be correct. They want other people to read it. I sat in a 6th grade classroom for a year, and one of the students, they were writing a research paper, okay? How boring can it get? These kids were so excited because they were allowed to bring their voice into the paper, all of things that they learned about through writing poetry and writing about their own lives. Suddenly they could do some research, and they felt like, she said, wow, I'm learning about this, and I want everyone to know, and these are things that I'm going to do. And so just the enthusiasm for any kind of content area learning through the writing builds, and she wanted it to be correct. She wanted it, grammatically, spell check, all of those things, because it meant a lot to her, and she wanted it to be put out there I believe this one particular student I'm referring to even won a writing contest.
Wow.
So, you know, it was a world of difference for her, and she was not someone who would write like that at the beginning.
And I think the other important thing about writing is the whole idea of authenticity again. The whole point of this program is to ensure that students are writers. We know that writing is to communicate a clear message to an audience, and that's good writing and that's communication. So this program really does focus on making all students authors, because they do have an audience of their peers that they express to, and in this case, the research paper, they take pride in it. We build, as Bob said before, that whole notion of self-efficacy, building confidence. They get confident. People that are confident in what they do, they work harder to do it better. So if we can do all of that, students becoming authors, building that confidence level, we really get somewhere with kids, and the motivation piece is incredible.
There are always those aha moments when students, all of a sudden that light goes off. From chapter 1, I'm just going to read the quote that the chapter starts with. This is an 8th grade student from 2007, writes, "At first, I hated writing and telling people what I had in my mind. It was difficult for me at first, but now I feel I like to write a novel." I mean, talk about going from absolutely hating writing to feeling so empowered that they want to write a book. I mean, that one of those aha moments that, Bob, you know, you're connecting with those students.
And what happens is, the reason why this happens is because somebody's listening to them. I was in a school just today, and a student came up to me who's in 8th grade, and she said, she goes, "Dr. Vogel, will you please read my work?" So she takes out her journal, and I read it, and it's all about her dad, who has not been in her life for like 3 years, and she's talking about how important it is, you know, to have a dad, and you haven't been there, and she's going on and on and on. The piece needed some work, so I said to her, "All right, now go back home. Here's my email. Rewrite it. Let's go back and forth. We're going to make this good. I can tell that this is something that's hurting inside." So she was really motivated, and so, you know, if somebody's listening. Now, this just happened to occur today when I was in a school, but if teachers listen to these things, these kids will write because somebody's listening to them. And they're not used to that. Usually they're writing a paper about a weekend or their summer vacation or about, you know, Christopher Columbus, but there's no connection there for them at this point. And so if they get these connections, they're going to build that internal motivation to write. And that's where the empowering comes in. That's where the empowering of these young people comes in. When they get a chance to be heard, and somebody's listening to them, and people are working with them, it's human nature. They're going to respond.
And this kind of writing does not occur in sterile situations. And so, you know, this book isn't really just about writing. It's about how do you build that culture of writers? How do you create a classroom environment where kids feel comfortable opening up, whether it's the students sharing with one another, the teacher sharing their writing with the students, and then again, just the sharing piece is huge because they always have an audience. Their classmates, their peers are their audience. Speaking with many of the teachers that have been involved in our program, behavior issues are next to nothing in these classes. Kids are getting in fights and suspended in other classes, yet they come into Writing Matters and Writers Matters, and they love it. They, you know, that's their time, their release, and you know, they even have these packs that, you know, what we say in here stays in here, and just really, you know, they suddenly become bonded, and you don't often see that in schools. So that's what's really nice about the program.
We only have a few minutes left here, and I don't want to make it sound that everybody that goes through this program is going to come out writing the next great American novel. There's another quote in here: "I learned who I am, well, part of who I am, and how I can change to make the honor roll." So this student, not necessarily wanting to write a novel, but feels so empowered that they can make the honor roll, where, and not knowing much about the student's background, maybe 3 months ago, 6 months ago, may have been nowhere there, but now feels so empowered that he's not going to write the next book, but he at least knows that he could make the honor roll. That's so important.
It really is. I think that they find themselves in the curriculum. Rather than this curriculum being something separate from themselves, they realize that the curriculum is is part of who they are.
Yep. In the 2 minutes that we have left, Bob, then what is it that you hope that not only administrators, educators, student teachers get out of the book, as well as the Writers Matter program?
Well, my goal is to have as many teachers and students involved. When we started the program, I think I had 250 students. This year, I have over 1,300 students in the Philadelphia school system at this point. My goal is to get as many teachers to work with as many students for a year at a time. I mean, this is it's a one-year program that can continue into the next year, but you need to get the teachers motivated to want to do it. And once you get the teachers involved, it's going to grow, because the kids are going to gravitate to it. Mm-hmm. So, my goal is to introduce as many people. I mean, some people it's going to work with, some people it's not. But we've had a really good track record over the years, and I think since we started the program, I think we've had something like 8,000 students involved with Writers Matters. And we're even going international now, and we have a program in Israel and Palestine, and we're hoping next year where the kids from Philadelphia will be communicating with the kids. And the thing that's so interesting is the same issues that are happening over in a different part of the world are the same issues. They're dealing with the same kinds of things. And even though maybe the conflict is different in the inner city versus what's going on there, the kids are still going through the same things.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for being with us. Empowering Young Writers, the Writers Matter Approach by Deborah Yost, Robert Vogel, and Kimberly Lewinski. And in the few seconds that I have here, I want to thank you, Bob, for everything you've done for me. It doesn't show that you were a professor of mine. We won't say how long ago, but again, I so much enjoyed your class and appreciate not only the class, but even working for you in my time here at LaSalle. And I thank you for everything you've done for me. Yeah. Thanks so much for being with us. Until the next time, my name is Paul Perrello. Thanks for being with us here on the Philly Factor.